Amazing. Just right.
Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, we believe that change is where opportunity happens. The best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. With our fireside chats, we're trying to expose everyone to some of the diversity that's out there. And certainly there is not a absence of change in the world. And today we're going to be talking around artificial intelligence and what some organizations are doing. Sneh Parmar is with us. He's CEO and co-founder of Lucky Labs, but he also has been doing a lot of work in terms of AI auditing, research, and helping companies actually do what they need to be able to use their data in a better way. Sneh has experience in investing, consumer behavior, and technology. Sneh, awesome to be able to see you today.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much, Matt, and the AFN community for having me. Really excited to just honestly just tell you a little bit about like myself, my previous companies, and what I'm doing today in kind of the generative AI space, and like how I think that it's one of the most transformational, I would say, opportunities in our lives with everything that's going to happen. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and so maybe just like, just to draw the bridge here for everyone. So Lucky is something you've been doing for a while, but I think that
yep.
that actually drew you in towards thinking about like how generative AI was working for companies. Can you tell that story first? How did you
Yeah.
start thinking about AI services in addition to the work that you're doing at Lucky? And maybe if you just give a little bit of overview on Lucky as well.
Yeah, happy to. What I'll do is I'll give you just a little bit of background on myself, just so people have that, and then kind of how I got into Lucky and what it's become, and then how that drew me into like generative AI and like kind of what I'm doing now in the new phase of my career. So first of all, it's great to meet everyone. Appreciate the time. A little bit about my background. Grew up in Atlanta. Was always interested in kind of like the retail tech, e-commerce space. Dad had retail stores, just like was very familiar with it. Fast forward a few years, ended up like one of the first things I ended up doing was launching a VC fund, investing in companies across pre-seed through Series A. Did that for a couple categories like machine learning, cybersecurity, and then e-commerce. Left that to join an agency where I cut my teeth in what my expertise is today, which is consumer behavior and how they buy. While I was doing that, ended up helping my friends launch consumer brands. Saw this whole rise of e-commerce during the pandemic. But this is kind of where Lucky comes in, where post-pandemic, we kind of saw the shift of brands going to retail earlier in their life cycle than ever before. And as brands were going to retail, they quickly realized that you are kind of at the mercy of the retail partner. It's kind of a black box. You're so used to all this data on e-commerce, but in retail, you're kind of beholden to whatever the retailer gives you. So me and my co-founder built this company called Lucky, really around the premise of like, can we go break down these walled gardens that retailers have and give brands more data to help them succeed more in retail? So I mean, this is something that we still believe we were just in the right time, right place. We ended up initially partnering with Sephora as our first major retail partner for my company called Lucky. What we do is we basically integrate with retailers like Sephora. We integrate into their backend inventory attribution systems. We cleanse that data, standardize it, and then basically share it back with the brands. So brands are now able to see their inventory availability in stores in real time, create shoppable experiences. So when customers are shopping on the brand.com and they want to go buy from the retailer as their preferred method of buying, then we can facilitate that entire experience, but also track that purchase. So brands using Lucky are able to see for the first time ever transactions that occur on retailer.com for their products. And then they can use that for a lot of variety of different sources like marketing, better creative, better product placement, whatever it may be. So
So
that's really
maybe
the,
to clarify really quick, when you're saying brand.com, that is
yeah.
the particular item that's being sold in retailer.com, which would be the Sephora's, right?
Yes, when I say brand.com, so I'll give you an example. So we'll take Fenty Beauty, for example, right? So everyone's familiar with Fenty Beauty, like Rihanna's brand. So that's like the brand.com. So if someone is shopping on fentybeauty.com and they see a product, but they're like, hey, let me go buy from Sephora, we create this experience on fentybeauty.com says, hey, buy with Sephora today. The product's actually available local to you right now. It'll take them to Sephora to purchase online for like buy online, pick up in store, same day delivery, whatever it may be. And that entire journey is captured by our technology, and we can send that data back to the brand. In this case, Fenty. So Sephora captures the sale, brands get that data.
Yeah.
That's already happening today. So the reason brands love working with us is because they already know customers shopping on like a Fenty Beauty or any brand.com are shopping in retail, but they get no data. So that's where
Right.
we come in. Since we have the partnership with the retailers, we're able to give them that data back. So we went on and built that technology. We've been scaling it up. Um, Over the past couple of years, building and scaling that company, we did a lot of work with like machine learning and like AI before it became like the thing everyone knows of it as today. And what we did was we built these like algorithms to basically like go through all of this different data sets that we get from major retailers like Sephora, Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, Ulta, Best Buy, all these retailers that we work with. They're like such a massive, dense sets of data. We have to like comb through it and figure out what we could actually utilize. And we took that and built it out for our own solution. And kind of how we got into like the Gen AI stuff and like what I'm into now is really because we had a few companies reach out to us like, hey, you guys have all this machine learning to pull us data out to understand inventory availability, track the attribution and all of that with your retailers. Can you build out like kind of like a one-stop shop for us for like our data portals? Like for and it initially started off with distributors, kind of people in our space. These are like distributors that work with like basically brands and retailers. They work with brands. Whenever brands get major POs from these like retailers like Walmart and Target, they basically take those products, facilitate the actual deployment into stores. And they were working on a whole like Excel sheet, like waiting for reports to come in via email, PDF style. They're like, we would love to like a dashboard like this using like generative AI and figure out where our missing gaps were. Since we already had an expertise in this process, we were like, yeah, we could actually do this. So we ended up building out a solution for them and got a few more people reaching out to us. And we're like, hey, there's actually an opportunity here to build out like very, very sector focused or even company focused AI tools or agents that could actually be helpful for these companies in a very significant way. So we basically were like, let's spin out a new company called Catalyst AI is what we have today. And what we do is we basically work with companies typically companies from anywhere from 10 to, I would say, 250 million in revenue, that are basically, it could be old industries like hospitality, like retail, it could be insurance, whatever it may be. What we do is we go in and do a free audit for these companies. We're like, hey, let us come in, we'll spend 4 weeks talking to your executives, your team, you're learning about your processes. And then we'll find out 3 gaps that we can actually solve for with Gen AI or AI agents. And then we give them a breakdown. Basically, like, hey, if we build this out, this is what it's going to cost, but this is the level of savings or increased revenue you could drive from this. And that's the 2 factors we really play in. It's like either helping them reduce costs or increasing revenue from their products. It's very black and white, very straightforward, and we come at it from not just an angle of like kind of like, hey, a consultant or strategy, but actual implementation and actual value add. And I think that's what differentiates us in the market.
So, I mean, so tend to, although like, there's massive firms out there, billions and billions of dollars of revenue, you're saying 10 to 250 million is where your guys' sweet spot is. $10 million in revenue, some of these firms, although, they're probably working their tails off, they might not feel like they have enough data to be able to actually be able to garner the types of insights that you're saying you can drive from it. Like what's the prerequisite, or how should we be evaluating the amount of data we have to make it worth using someone like you guys?
No, and that's a great question. And I think like it's so interesting. Like everyone wants to add AI to their organization or company in a way. And like, I mean, I personally don't think anyone should force it. I think with the companies that try to add AI just for the sake of saying it, end up with actually the worst results. And you're absolutely right, Matt. I think it comes down to like how good of a quality is your data sets. Like at the end of the day, like that's what AI is built on, right? It's basically built on search and learning on what you currently have. And if you don't have enough information to feed into the system, then the results are going to be subpar and it's not actually going to be valuable to you. So for companies like, let's say towards a smaller end, around the 10 million, I mean, that's kind of why we do the audit phase, right? Before we bring on a client, it's like, hey, we go into their existing systems and talk to their executives and learn about their business. We're like, do you actually have enough data? Like there's businesses that are at 10 million in revenue that have a ridiculous amount of data on their backend because that's just the name of the game. Like that's just how they function. They might be more of a commission-based platform. So like they might be doing actually like hundreds of millions of revenue, but like the 10 million is actually their net revenue. So they actually might have so much data that actually could be valuable. But that audit phase is super important for us because we need something to plug into. Like we need a process, we need a system, we need
Yeah.
a certain workflow that a company's currently using in order to actually add value with an AI agent. And listen, like I mean, what I would tell people is like, listen, if you're at a small enough scale where everything's working well, like you're a pretty lean team and you don't need to automate a lot of things, then just continue doing it from a grassroots movement. Like don't add technology to sake for the sake of adding technology, right? I think people made that mistake a while back, and now I think they're doing the same thing with AI. They're like adding AI for the sake of adding AI. I think that's the worst case. I think add it if it actually makes economical sense for your organization.
So when let's say I'm a smaller firm,
Yeah.
are they coming to you saying like, "Hey, we have a hypothesis on like we're looking for X," or are they saying, "Hey, we know there's opportunity sitting in here, we just don't know where it is." Like,
Right.
what are they coming to you saying? Because I want to be able to get in the headspace of the folks who are working for companies at AFN is like, what are the questions they ought to be asking themselves, or do they need to have a question prior to
Yeah.
investigation?
No, that's a great thing. I mean, like clients that come to us that say, "Hey, we think this is a piece of our business that we want to help automate or add an AI agent to." I mean, that's great for us, right? Because like it clearly means that they've thought through a certain portion of where they need help, and they're probably underwater, right? They're like, "Hey, we either go and hire a lot of people for this, or we can add AI and like make simplify this process." So that's always great for us. I mean, it always gives us a starting point versus if a company just comes to us saying, "Hey, we're like this
Figure
like."
something out.
Yeah, we're like a hospitality business or we're an insurance company. Like, go look into our business and like we'll see where we can add AI. Like, that's great. I mean, like, it gives us flexibility, right, to offer you the three opportunities that we think could be the most valuable. But also, it's like it's such an open sea
Right.
where it's like
Right.
anything can make sense, right? So for the ones that have like a small business, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? Like, one is like, can they improve internal efficiencies, right? Like, that's always something that always comes up. It's like, can you help us reduce the amount of like manual workload internally? Whether that's like pulling data sets, Excel files, all this stuff. Can you put it into like a dashboard that auto updates in terms of like and gives me suggestions on what I should do next? There's always like the second is like customer support or engagement. Like a lot of customers come to us saying, "Hey, can you create like an AI powered like chatbot that's really specific to us, like maybe from a hospitality perspective,
Yeah.
and it learns everything about our customer segment, our reviews, all of that." Sometimes it can be product enhancements, right? If it's more of a traditional organization that's not really tech focused, they might be like, "Hey, we have this product that we built out with an agency or something that we had hired a while back, but we want to make improvements on it and actually add some automation to it." We can do with that. Then there's also like cross-industry applications, right? Like in healthcare, we had a healthcare client that we worked with around like basically predicting copays for patients before they even entered the clinic. Like that was an important thing. Whereas like usually it was a very manual process. A patient would come in, present their health card ID, and then they would actually look up their copay and then figure out how much the patient had to pay up front. Whereas like this is what we built for them was like the patient could be sitting at home and before they walked into the clinic, they know exactly how much cash to bring. For example, of how what they should pay for copay. So there's a lot of opportunities there. I just think it's like finding the one that's going to add the most value for the least amount of effort, at least early on for these companies, especially if they're earlier stage.
Right. So okay, we're around a couple years in, I would say, on chat after Chat GPT got launched. What's the when you're doing your interviews with executives at these companies, what is the level of sophistication on their understanding of generative AI at this point? What are the types of things that you're hearing that are spot on? What's the stuff where, clearly the knowledge hasn't caught up to where it could be?
Yeah, no, and like the real answer is like basically it's all over the place. Like, I mean,
Okay.
we've
Yeah.
been with we met with business executives that we brought that we've done work for, basically like in the insurance space. Like didn't know much at all. They were like, "Hey, we just know we have this manual underwriting process right now. Then we plug in a couple numbers and it gives us like what we should pay or we should charge the customer. Like, can we add AI to like make this much more sophisticated?" And basically, like, it was such an open-ended problem that we had to like. I mean, that ended up taking a little bit longer from an audit perspective, just because like we needed it to learn that
Right.
industry a little
Right.
bit more before we added something. And then come across people that have probably a pretty significant understanding of AI and automation. They just know that hey, they were brought in as like the CTO of this organization, and they have a lot of things on their plate. They needed an outsized resource like us to come in and actually implement the solution for them, where they already had like kind of a breakdown of like, hey, this is what the product spec looks like.
Yeah.
Like, we know exactly what we need. We just need the development firm to do it, and that's what we provide, right? We provide the software development expertise, and then we actually implement that solution. So It's a little all over the place, and I think as time progresses, people are getting better. I think it's becoming a lot more natural for businesses and for people to just to hear about like basically like obviously OpenAI, ChatGPT, all this stuff that people are reading about and seeing. So I think it's just making the industry a lot better. I think it also opens up a lot more opportunity for organizations like us that are like, hey, it's no longer more of an educational thing. We're like, hey, you need to add AI and this is why, but more so like, hey, like you've obviously thought about this. You know you should be adding it, and we come to the table and like, hey, this is what you think you should do from an actual product perspective.
Are there any uh, functions or industries that you feel like are either particularly good in understanding like the questions to ask, or on the flip side, particularly bad? Is it like, you know what, like the finance guys just don't know what to ask? What type of trends are you seeing around that?
Yeah, no, that's actually a very good question. I mean, I think. So I think marketing always does a really good job. And I understand like technology the earliest. I think people that are usually in the marketing world always have to be a step ahead of their competitors that
Okay.
are doing marketing. So those people have a pretty good handle on AI, like how they can use it for certain marketing purposes and stuff. So I think industry-wise, like e-commerce and retail, I think they're like typically good about it. I mean, you saw
Okay.
Amazon just launched their own basically an AI chatbot when you're on Amazon called Rufus. So I think that's a pretty good solution. I think industries I think are less used to implementing stuff like this. I mean, I think healthcare, right? Healthcare is it's just a bit hard problem to solve, just because there's so many like privacy issues. So I think that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I think finance is a little slow as well. They're used to models on Excel and all of that, like the traditional method of doing it. I think utilizing a tool such as AI or agents to streamline certain processes takes a little bit of an educational piece. But I think people are going their way. I would say I would have said like lawyers and like legal, but I mean we've seen probably a dozen companies come up in the last probably year, raising tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, servicing specifically just legal firms.
Yeah.
Because so much manual labor. If you think about how much
Oh,
paralegals
my
and like
goodness. Yeah.
lawyers just do it from a paperwork perspective. I mean, it's just an industry that's ripe for change with this
Expensive
technology.
labor. Yeah.
Yeah, very expensive. Like that's exactly what I would say. I feel like anything that like that charges per hour, like lawyers charge like $1,000 an hour. Anything that is something like that, that's very manual. I think those industries are ripe for AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. So in terms of thinking about uh, people could be trying to hire this expertise themselves, or
Hmm.
they can try and retrain people around it, or they can be looking outside for it. What do you think are the questions that folks ought to be asking in terms of where their investment in understanding this, I would say to begin with, and then getting something out of it? How do you think people should be organizing that thought process for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really comes down to like the organization itself, right? Like, are you more of a legacy industry, right? Like, are you like there's like a landscaping business? Are you like a landscaping business that does like tens of millions of revenue per year, right? Which is a great business to have, but your expertise is not really in technology.
Yep.
So
Okay.
I think it really comes down to like what type of business you are. I mean, if you're a technology business, and the founders are very technical, I think typically they're probably going to build in-house, like they're going to
Yep.
just going to hire machine
Okay.
learning engineers, et cetera. And I think that makes sense because your core product that you sell is technology. I think if your core product, like I said, if you're a landscape business, like it's not technology. Like you're using technology to supplement your business, but your core product is the services you provide to your clients, such as like lawnmowing. So I think for in those instances, you should look for a third party partner like us to go and develop solutions or products for you. I think that's something that I think most business executives and founders miss out, right? They forget that what is their core competency? Like what is the thing that you're selling that makes you more that's valuable to you and focus on that.
Okay. So the landscaping businesses, they could get the most value from a third party firm, but they are arguably least well equipped to be able to actually evaluate these firms that could help them do so. What do
Yeah.
you think are some of the ways that, or the questions they should be asking to evaluate these firms? What like base level of knowledge should they have going in to those discussions?
Right. And those and I would say those probably go towards the end where there's like the least knowledgeable about like
Right.
generative AI and stuff. So like it's a little bit more of an educational piece there. But I think the questions that they should be asking is like they obviously for sizable landscaping businesses, like they obviously have a lot of customer data, right? They have a lot
Okay.
of other repeat businesses. But they're probably also looking to expand, right? Like, I mean, a lot of them are also owned by PE firms and they're doing like roll-ups. So like the people that are running those businesses, like the way I would look at it is, um, what part of my business is the most labor intensive? That's not the actual core service that I'm providing today. And
Okay.
is that a lot of that is that a lot of it is customer support? Is a lot of it when customers
Okay.
change appointment timings, right? And it messes with my entire workflow for the day. Whereas like I know this one the one team I hired, they're gonna go hit these houses. This is their route, planning, all of that. It made sense. They're gonna hit all of them today. They're the most efficient way to generate revenue. And if one person cancels, it messes that all up, right? So how can I
Sure.
adapt to that? So I think that's kind of where questions that I would be asking is like, what part of my business is the most labor intensive? How can I streamline this if I even can, right? Like there's certain parts of it you can't, right? Like I can't you can't add AI to the actual lawn mowing service itself, right? Like we don't have robotic, I mean lawnmowers.
You're
I mean
right.
we
Right.
might, but we're not yet.
Not
Uh,
there yet.
yeah, not there yet. So I mean, I think I would look at it from like the support perspective for them. They're like, hey, if they can reduce their support team by 50% and adding generative AI that can streamline the process, be there 24/7. Like if someone's like, let's say at 10 p.m. realizing they're not going to be there that morning and I want to move my service time or whatever, like I don't need to wait to call the team at 9 a.m. in the morning. I could just have a conversation with an AI agent right then and there at 10 p.m. while I'm sitting in my house. So I
Okay.
think places where I would start thinking about it, or those are the questions I would ask, like, hey, what parts of my business can I be most valuable?
Okay. So they're able to start to find their problem set then that they would like to work around, right? You're saying
Yeah.
like, hey, here's the things you ought to be looking
Mhm.
for the firm that they could be working with. Let's say like, there's there is Catalyst and like five other firms that they find that they're like, hey, we want to talk to these folks. How can they evaluate the expertise of you guys or other folks to understand that, hey, these are people who have thought deeply about what we can do. They will deliver what we want and produce the value on it. What sort of questions would should people be asking you on whether or not you're a good value for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing is always portfolio of previous work. I mean, I think that
Okay.
that's like
Yeah.
I would say like that's not probably the number one thing. It's like has this organization done work before? Ideally, if they've done work in my space, that's even better, right? Like if for us, like we have a tendency to sell better to distributors and people in the distribution or the logistics space, just because we've been in that space for so long, so we know the pain points that they face. We know the industry very well. So like we lean towards that, right? Um, so I think like obviously portfolio of work. I would say obviously like some level like of technical capabilities that they've broken down in terms of like, hey, what formats are they good at? And then I also like I mean I would say this specific industry is very relationship driven, right? If we're since it's more of like an agency, right? So why do
Okay.
certain brands go with certain
Okay.
agencies is like, hey, previous work and like the relationship that they've built out. And then or warm introductions. I would say those are probably some of the biggest things that come into the space. And then at the end of the day, like cost, right? Like what are these firms charging me, right? Like
Okay.
if
Yeah.
let's say this, like if we go back to the landscaping example, what Catalyst charges versus what an Accenture would charge you is probably drastically different.
Right.
So I mean, I think that probably plays a very big role into like kind of the decision making. But I mean, I would always start off with a portfolio of work. I think that's always the most important thing. I mean,
Okay.
like as a business, you should see if they've done work in your space. They've built out applications similar to what you're looking for, cost, and then relationship.
Okay. And then in terms of like, so, this is relatively new in terms of what is being offered as well.
Yeah.
How could people figure out cost comparisons? Because you're like, oh, $10 million, that seems like it's ridiculous, but it might turn out not to be. And
Yeah.
so how can people start to think about comparing costs for these services? Because like I think that is the hardest thing with the services business is like, all right, how can I compare quality on this and what I'm getting for it?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And like I would say probably 50% of it is like just it's kind of like a gut feeling, like just knowing based off the work and like testimonials and stuff that they or introductions to previous customers that they open and
Yeah,
give you.
okay.
I think that those are a couple ways to do it.
Okay.
And then obviously previous work. But in terms of like let's say you get costs from like two different parties, right? And then you're just like comparing like, hey, one's like pretty high, one's pretty low. But like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
obviously don't want to go with the pretty low one if it's not a good work. And you don't want to go with the pretty high one if it's just the same thing, but they're just charging you too much. So I think that's when you that's when you as the business executive have to make the decision, right? It's like, hey, who do you trust to go forward with? I think it's even like even for us, like for Lucky, when we buy like software vendors, right? We use a certain CRM system. It's like, why do we use that versus like another like Salesforce, for example? It's just like, hey, is it cost or is it actual? Can it do what it needs to be done? So in this space, I think it's more so like, can they actually execute what they need to, what they say? Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, just from what you said, I think references are essentially like next level importance here.
yeah,
Um, to be able to actually get some sort of hit on like, hey, what's the value that you got from this? And
exactly.
yeah, they'll probably share some cost information or something like that. Uh,
Right.
what's the what's the problem that you've seen that you guys have worked on that you're like, wow, that was really cool that we figured that out? What's something that got you excited?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the problems, I mean, I think it was for the distributor partner that we worked with. It's just space we know really well. Obviously, retail, like logistics is something we just know.
Yeah.
I think the problem there was like there's so many disparate data sources that this business was pulling into in order to pull like basically a report for their brands that since we were able to like streamline all these integrations into one platform. I mean, for us, I mean, we were like, I mean, we were contracted to build that out for them. I mean, we were like,
Right.
this it itself could be a solution they could sell to other distributors because like that's how great of a solution we thought we built was. They could go sell
Okay.
that software product.
Yeah.
But obviously that's their differentiator, right? Like they competed with other distributors where like when they go to brands like, hey, we can have all your data in one place, easy for you to digest, and actually have actionable items from that data. So I thought that was a very interesting problem. Just more so because like a personal interest. Like I mean, being able to see like how fast you're selling in retail, plus like where the product is in route right now to getting redistributed to those locations, plus like also how your D2C is doing all in one solution was really interesting to me. And then the other one was the insurance company that I was mentioning. Like we did some AI underwriting for an insurance company that basically
Okay.
needed to underwrite loans they were giving. And I think that was I mean that was an industry like we were not very familiar with at all. We just won
Yeah.
that deal just because we were able to build a relationship and prove out that we could actually build out the solution in an effective time and at cost. And it was a completely new learning opportunity. So I thought that was very interesting how you can use
Okay.
AI agents to streamline those processes.
All right. And so like putting on our binoculars, looking into the future, a couple years, um, what do you think is going to be possible that's not right now?
Oh man, I mean, I mean that's I think anyone's
Not go
guess.
5 years out. Let's just a couple years.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone's good as guess is as good as mine. But I mean, one thing, I mean, one thing I think is gonna be really interesting is like right now. I always look at it kind of things from a marketing lens because I always think marketing people are always ahead of the curve, especially
Okay.
technology, because they have to be. I think right now, like I think content creation, like I think that's one segment of the industries of the
Okay.
brands and retailers is going to be a bit fully automated. Like you already have things like Sora, which I believe is OpenAI's model, where like you see basically movie studios stop building their studios now because they're like we can just create everything with AI, like it'll create a perfect picture and everything. So like about I think about 6 months to a year ago, Tyler Perry stopped building. He was building a couple $100 million studio in Atlanta because that's where he's based out of. And he
Right.
stopped building it because he saw what AI was capable of, and he's like, within the next 5 years, like I won't have to actually film content anymore. I can just type in what I want, and it will actually just make it for me. And so you can basically have someone's image or likeness in that content. So I think like that's a crazy
Wow.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you won't even have to create content or campaigns or videos. I think that's something that's super unique. I think robotic technology is going to be like its own new world. I'm sure everyone here saw like the Tesla robot, like the marketing that they did about it, like having like a robot like fold your clothes, cook your food. I think like that's crazy. But I mean, I think it's all possible in the next like 5 years or less.
Wow. Cool. So what we'll do now is we'll go to questions, but we'll stop recording in just a sec. So thanks, Sneh, for the discussion. People will be able to check this out on our YouTube channel. This was great.
Thanks. Yeah, no, thank you for having me, guys.